Unique people leading unique lives shape and inform Iowa City. This community is enhanced by these women and men who live in our midst, working, teaching, creating. Welcome to a series of conversations with people who have stories to tell. Join my guests and me, Ellen Buchanan, in a series of interviews called One of a Kind. Edna Englert was born in Iowa City in 1902. Next year, in 2002, she will be Iowa City's very own centenarian. Not only did Edna grow up on Lucas Street, she spent her entire public school career from 1908 to 1920 on the block, which Mercy Hospital Center now sits, containing Second Ward School, Grammar School, High School, and the gym. She started piano lessons at the age of 8 and for 65 years played the organ at St. Wenceslas Church. She was the niece of the owners of the Englert Theater, William and Henrietta Englert. She has wonderful memories of attending the Ziegfeld Follies and other shows and plays at the theater. When Edna was in high school, a sophomore, she had a few dates with the Iowa City historian Irving Weber. In 1926, she married Phil Englert, a fourth cousin of William and a childhood playmate of Irving's. Besides knowing a lot about history of Iowa City in the 20th century, she volunteers at the Senior Center, has for 20 years, the Mercy Hospital gift shop, and is very active in the Catholic Church and Catholic organizations. An important part of her story is that she is a huge sports fan, especially the Hawkeyes and the Chicago Cubs. She never misses a Hawkeye breakfast prior to the home football games, and this fall was made an honorary I-Club member. Edna and Phil raised 2 children in Iowa City, Kathleen and John. There are 2 grandchildren and 2 great-grandchildren. Welcome, Edna, to One of a Kind. This will be fun, and you can tell so many stories about your growing up in Iowa City. And your story I'd like you to begin with is about your mother, whose maiden name was Chopik, and who grew up in Goosetown. And your father's family were the Rummelharts, and I read that they came by covered wagon from Ohio. And your father was born on the half block of between Lucas and Bloomington. Is that correct? Where was your father born?
Up on North Dodge Street.
Oh, on North Dodge Street. Okay.
That was where I was born.
You were born on Lucas, and your father was born on North Dodge.
Yes. And my mother was born on Bloomington Street in Goosetown.
In Goosetown. Tell me a little bit about your early memories of your mother and father and your grandparents and some of the stories of growing up at that time.
Well, have you heard the one about me? Well, my mother would go to a little afternoon meeting, and she would say, now, after school, you go down to Bubby's. That's grandmother in Bohemian. And wait until I come for you. So I would go there in Goosetown, and when I'd walk into the kitchen, there'd be 3 or 4 ladies gathered around the table, stripping goose feathers for the famous goose pillows and feather beds that they used in those days for covers. There was a big coffee pot on the stove, and a plate of kolaches, which is a Bohemian delicacy, all ready for the ladies to enjoy after they got through stripping.
Now, she wasn't the only one who had a goose business. A lot of people in the neighborhood women raised geese?
Well, I don't know whether, I'm not sure whether my grandparents had geese or not, but there were so many that did. And the feathers, of course, they were very choice to be sure to to keep the feathers so that they could be stripped and used for the feather beds.
Now, your father, Rummelhart, worked at a hardware store, and then he had a truck and delivered or picked up laundry from the University of Iowa students.
And he'd always pick up their bags. He'd go down to the railroad station at the time of the students coming in for fall, you know, and he'd pick up their bags, ask them if they'd like to have their bags delivered. And of course, I don't think he probably charged as much as the rest of them did. And he loved being with the young people. My father was so young at heart. And that was one of his great loves, was to go down and meet the kids and help them with their luggage.
And he picked up, I meant to finish, he picked up the laundry and took it to women in Iowa City who took in laundry and then would pick it back up again and return it to the students.
Yes.
And you said your father, you mentioned just now that your father was young at heart. He loved celebrations, I read, and he loved the 4th of July.
Oh, he decorated our house, and we'd have a case of pop for us, and we always made homemade ice cream. And my mother would she used to raise chickens. We had a little backyard chicken yard, and that was one of the things I hated, to gather the eggs. I was always so afraid the chickens would peck at me. And then we'd have our fried spring chicken on that day.
Now, you had 2 sisters,
Yes.
Mary and Alice,
Right.
and your father had half a block of Lucas and built 3 houses on Lucas. One at 220.
That's where I was born.
That's where you were born. And then your mother, you told me before the interview that your mother thought it was too small.
So, well, and then she was pregnant with the third child, see? And of course, Mary, they only had 1 bedroom in this first little house. And I can still see, we had a corner bed in one of the corners in the same bedroom with my father and mother. And so my mother, with the 3rd child coming, she knew we were more than pressed for room. So she got my father then to get busy, and he built, and we always called it the big house.
The big house. It's still standing.
Pardon?
It's still standing.
Oh, yes.
All 3 houses.
All 3 houses.
Your whole family was musical, and you inherited that gene, and you've had a long career.
Well, the Rummelhart family, and I used to love to go to Grandma and Grandpa Rummelhart's because Aunt Lenora, and they never had a note. Not one of them ever had a lesson. And they all played some kind of an instrument. Aunt Lenora played the piano. And that was our entertainment. We'd have sing-alongs. And I just loved that. Everybody would sing. And then the guys would crack jokes in between, you know, and they'd pop corn, and I had a wonderful childhood.
What other instruments besides the piano?
Violin, my dad played. He played a big tuba or horn, and it's hanging in the Johnson County place out at Coralville, Historical.
The Historical Museum.
And then one of my uncles played a trombone, and one of my uncles played I think he played a clarinet.
And you started piano lessons at an early age.
Yeah.
And music has meant a great deal to you. And
yes.
For 65 years, you were the organist at St. Wenceslas Church, and you received something very special from the Pope.
Yes.
Tell us about this.
Well, I can't say the Latin name for it, but anyway, it's given to people who have had a long time of service in the church or were very long affiliated with something in the church. And I had 3 choirs. I had a high school girls choir, and I had a men's chorus, all men, and then I had the general church choir to have practices with.
Did your girls, did Kathleen, was she musical? Is your daughter
She
musical?
took some lessons, and she has a nice voice. She could sing, but she never followed up on anything, you know. And John loved music too, and would sing a little bit. But in those days, you know, men were supposed to be sissies if they had any kind of music instinct, you know. So John was, very athletic, and he was part of the Iowa team when he was a kid. He went down and after school to all the practices, and he and Evashevsky were very good friends. And
Well,
he went to the Rose Bowl,
great.
and so the music then was another part that he didn't follow up on either.
I want to get back to your mother. She was Bohemian, like we said, and she did not want you to speak Bohemian because you would be nicknamed Bohunks.
Yeah, that they called those Bohunks in those days, and that I don't think that was her real reason. Her real reason was that she wanted us to be perfect in speaking English, and she felt that if we try to jibe the Bohemian with the English, we wouldn't get what we should out of it, you know. And so what the little Bohemian I knew or could read was from my grandmother.
When you were young, you spent a lot of time at the Iowa City Public Library.
Oh, yes. I walk home, and I think of this very often with all the crime that's going on. I would walk home at 9 o'clock at night, or maybe even later, when the library closed, I don't remember, and all by myself, or many times I'd come in late for supper, we always called it in those days, and my mother would just look up from the stove stirring something. She'd say, "Oh, you've been to the library?" And I'd say, "Yes." So she'd know where I was, because that's why we...
Do you remember the kind of books you enjoyed at that time?
Rebecca of Sunnybrook Farm, Anne of Green Gables, any of those girl stories.
Those classic girl stories.
Right.
And do you remember who was the director of the library when you were young?
McRaith.
McRaith?
MC, capital R-A-I-T-H.
Uh-huh.
Abigail, I think her name was. Abigail McRaith. And then Jessie Gordon came after her, I think.
And Lolly Eggers, who I know interviewed you about your reminiscences.
But I never knew Lolly before she came to interview me.
But she told me that you were very intimidated with McRaith and Gordon, that they...
Oh, of course, you know, they kept, you weren't supposed to even whisper.
How times have changed in libraries.
Yes, yeah. And so anybody that made any disturbance of any kind, you were either squelched or put out. You had to get out if you weren't quiet.
Besides the library, I know you loved when the circus came to town, and for a lot of people now, they don't have that memory because the circuses quit. When did they quit? I don't know. 40 years ago, maybe, coming to town.
Well, my dad.
Do you remember where it was?
My dad got us up at 4:30, and we'd go down to see the circus unload. And of course, I got such a kick out of the elephants. They'd take these big poles, you know, for the tents, and they'd take them over and place them right where they were supposed to be. And we just thought that was wonderful. Well, then, my uncle, Will Englert, incidentally, he was married to my mother's younger sister. That's how he is my uncle. He would get tickets from the circus because he owned several large billboards in Iowa City, and the circus would rent them from him, and they'd always give him a handful of tickets. So Aunt Etta would take us to the circus, and my mother loved the elephants. And she'd right away get a bag of peanuts and walk right over to the elephants and start feeding. She loved to put the peanut in the trunk, you know, and then see it.
Do you remember where the circus came to? Do you remember where they set up?
South of Iowa City.
Is it like down by the Johnson County Administration Building?
It'd be south.
Okay.
I think it was Lucas property, but I'm not sure. It was the Lucas family.
Had to be near a train track.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
That's where they set up. And you could see, we walked there because we didn't have any transportation.
Mm-hmm.
And so we'd go down to Aunt Etta's, down at the theater, and see, she lived on the second floor, you know. And then we'd all walk down there. And then another thing I remember about the circus, she would always buy us an ice cream cone. The men would come along with the ice cream cones, you know, 5 cents. So Aunt Etta would always buy us an ice cream cone. And to this day, there's never been one that tasted as good to me as that one that we bought at the circus.
5 cents. And you also were a witness to the first plane that landed in the state of Iowa.
Yeah.
Do you remember that?
Well, Phil was very interested. Of course, he's an engineer, you know. And planes were very much in his topmost. He was always reading about them. And so when we learned of it coming, why, yeah, and we'd go down at nighttime. And I remember this is not for your, but when I was pregnant, we'd go down almost every night to see there was a plane came in at nighttime, you know. And of course, in early summer, it would come in, it would still be kind of daylight. But then later on, then they'd have all the field lights on, and it would land. And they always laughed and said when Kay went to work for United Airlines that she came by naturally because I was down at their field all the time during my pregnancy.
During your pregnancy, watching those planes land. And at the same place that we have our little Iowa City airport,
Right.
that's where they came in. And another wonderful memory I read is that you went to camp. You were a campfire girl.
Yes.
On Rocky Shore Drive, up above the Iowa River.
Right.
And you could swim in the Iowa River.
We went down. There were, maybe 8 or 10 of us. And we had a director, of course. And we were there for a week. We paid so much rent. We each put in so much money. And then that would pay our rental of the cabin and for our food. And of course, we got our own meals and everything. And oh yes, we had a wonderful time.
And splashing and playing in the Iowa River, which not many people swim in the Iowa River now.
We wore long street garments, you know, and they were made of a brown, about this color, heavy material with a lot of beadwork. And then we made beaded headbands. And that, with my moccasins, is out of the Johnson County Historical. I gave it to them.
Your moccasins from your campfire girl
and
days.
It had leather. We had leather fringe on the sleeves and on the bottom. And we made our own dresses, our own outfits.
Now, Edna, when you, probably soon after you were a campfire girl, you were about 15 years old, you got Spanish influenza. And it took quite a toll on you, didn't it?
Took my hearing.
Took your hearing.
And in fact, almost took me. My folks, I was told, didn't take their clothes off, didn't remove their clothes for 2 days. They just watched round the clock because I was just hovering. And everybody around us was dying. Next door, across the street, next block, our own doctor died of it.
My. 1917 it was.
Oh, that was terrible. Yeah.
So did you get a hearing aid soon after that? Or?
No, Aunt Etta said to me, she said, Edna, I think you could use a hearing aid. And I said, well, I can't afford one, because in those days they were quite expensive too, in our line of thinking. And so she said, well, I'll pay for it if you'll wear one. So she got in touch with this man, and he came down from Cedar Rapids, and he was from Acousticon. I think they still make hearing aids. And came down and tested me, and I recall very well, he kept his mouth covered when he talked to me. And
So you wouldn't lip read?
I said, why are you doing that? And he said, you lip read too well. He didn't want me to know what he was saying to provoke interference with the hearing aid.
Huh. And soon after, you obviously got better, and you were in high school then, and I read that you had a few dates with Irving Weber, and so many of my viewers know about and know of Irving. What do you remember about Irving?
Oh, he was a kidder, a lot of fun, prone to laughter. We laugh over the silliest things, you know. And of course, as we got older and got together, he was always, Edna, do you remember? And he'd call me, and and many times it was in reference to the theater because he knew we were very close, you know. And we talked for a half hour on the telephone.
He was 2 years older than you, and then you used to get together. What's this North Star baseball gatherings that you two would see each other? What are those?
Well, there was a baseball team in Iowa City called the North Star, and they would go around, play different towns that had, in those days, that was an entertainment for young men, you know, fellows. And I don't know how Irving became one of the men they always used to call on to speak, because he was so much fun, I guess, and because he had delved into a lot of Iowa City history and had known or learned about this group. And my cousin, Leo Chopik, was a pitcher for the team. And so Irving would, I wouldn't see him too many times, but we'd always get together and have a little gab fest. And one Christmas, I was knitting. I'm a big knitter, crocheter. I do a lot of that. I can't sit and watch television without keeping my hands going. So anyway, I made he and Martha, his wife, a pair of bedroom slippers, knitted. And I made his black and old gold, of course.
Oh, perfect.
And he reminded me many times after that about the bedroom slippers and how much they enjoyed them. And he came out to my house a couple times, and he's autographed a couple of his books. He brought me one when I had my, what was it, I remember it was my 90th, and he brought me a book and autographed it for me. Yeah, I sure miss him.
Yeah, he was a wonderful, wonderful man and resource for Iowa City. I know you graduated from City High, like I said in the introduction. And then you went to the university for a couple of years, and then decided to go to work and quit school. Was that hard?
I had worked in the summer, and I had this job at the Economy Advertising Company. I was a proofreader. You know, to this day, I can spot a mistake just like that in the paper.
Good for you.
Because I learned, I proofread with Daddy Springer, white-haired old gentleman. I don't know how old he was, but boy, he was sharp. And he knew his English, and he could spot a mistake just like that. And then I got to take care of, we had timesheets in those days, and I'd go around in the morning, collect the timesheets, come back to my desk, and then I had to notate everything, you know. And I was getting a pretty good salary, and so I thought, oh shoot, why should I go on? My second year was a little tough, and I wasn't going to get, I had gone on a scholarship, and I wasn't going to get, it wasn't going to be renewed, so I didn't think folks could afford it, and I didn't think I'd get that much out of it, so I chose not to go back. My mother was okay, but my dad felt very sorry that I did not get my degree. That was one of his
kind of dreams for you.
Yeah.
I want to talk about your relationship with the Englert Theater. We've touched on that a bit, that I mentioned, and you did too, that William was married to your mother's youngest sister, Henrietta, called Etta. And they lived on the second floor of the Englert Theater.
Yeah.
And when you and your husband Phil were married in 1926, you lived across the street, and for many people who've lived here for a while, Barbara's Bake Shop is just kind of a very special place downtown. It's no longer here, but you lived above Barbara's Bake Shop.
Third floor.
Third floor?
Yes. Okay, now you have one mistake.
Okay.
That was not Uncle Will. He was gone.
He was
dead then.
gone.
She was married to Jim Hanlon.
Oh.
That
was her second husband.
That was her second husband. And when the theater burned, because I was working at the Economy, and they came and said, Edna, you better go, because they didn't know how bad it was. And of course, they knew of my relationship. So they let me go from work down to the theater. Well, of course, my aunt was devastated, and she and Uncle Jim came right across the street to Edna and Phil's. We were married the 14th of January. This happened the 13th of February.
And 1926.
And Phil had sent me a dozen roses to mark the anniversary.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we had one bedroom, so Aunt Ed and Jim took the bedroom.
And where'd you two go?
On the Davenport. The old Davin opened out into a bed in the living room.
For 9 months? My goodness, that was generous of you and Phil.
Yeah. But
what caused the fire? Do they know?
What?
What caused the fire?
It was the oily rags down in the pit under the stage.
Mm-hmm.
That's what they thought it was anyway. They had an oil spill, or they used oily rags for something, and that's where it started.
Do you remember some of the shows you saw at the Englert Theater?
Yeah.
You went to the Ziegfeld Follies
Always.
there.
And one I remember particularly, they erected or had a swing from the ceiling, and this girl, while they sang this song, she got in the swing and she swung out over the audience. That's the thing I remember. And of course, then they had these extravagant, huge plume back headdresses, you know.
Mm-hmm.
They were huge. I don't know how those girls ever kept them on their head.
What a wonderful experiences for you and then to know the owner. And
yeah, but then we paid. Phil and I paid for our seats. We went in and sat downstairs.
Mm-hmm.
But times we'd go upstairs, we didn't always go, but then Aunt Ed would say, well, there's kind of a good movie on, would you like to go? So then we'd go in, see. And of course then Kay, when Kay was little, and I'd want to go shopping, I'd take her up, and Aunt Ed and Uncle Jim would take. He was crazy about her. He just loved children, and he loved her. Of course,
that was the second husband. That was Aunt Edda's second husband.
He was Irish, and her name was Kathleen.
Oh.
And they were her godparents.
That's wonderful. Now, tell me how you and your husband Phil, who was a civil engineer and worked in the architect's office at the university, you two were huge, and you still are, a huge sports fan. Went to football games and basketball games.
I can remember when the Iowa Field was on the east bank of the river.
Okay.
One year, and we sat through a snowstorm, and we were playing Notre Dame, and we won.
We beat Notre Dame.
But we never, ever moved. We sat right there, never moved, and we'd go with blankets, and I'd wear galoshes on my feet, and yeah, we'd go if it was pouring rain.
How did you feel about becoming an honorary I-Club member? Congratulations. And I hear Doris Marshall, a very special friend of yours, picks you up in the morning of the breakfast.
6 o'clock.
6 o'clock, and you go. Were you surprised to become an honorary I-Club member?
Yes, I was. Well, I think he was talking about the sweater that I wore.
Mm-hmm.
when the Christmas before we were married, Phil gave me this old gold sweater. And so I wear it to all these club breakfasts. And I told Doris about it. She told Pat, and Pat told somebody else. So then he was talking about this, and I wasn't paying much attention, you know, to it. And until Doris poked me. And then he had mentioned me, see, and I guess, and then they gave me this T-shirt, and then afterwards, a lot of people came up and shook hands, you know, and I said, I just wondered if they were just coming to see what the sweater looked like.
I mean, that sweater is quite old, Edna.
It
That's
is.
quite old.
We would have been married 75 years, you see,
And so it's 75 years old.
we were married in 26.
That's right.
26 from '01.
Well, and I read also in research that when your husband died, the flag was flown at half-mast. That meant a lot to you, didn't it?
Sure did.
That was wonderful that they did that.
He knew, Phil was a great talker and friendly person, and every place he went, I mean, he liked to talk, and I think he knew everybody in the university. He was, and then he was, since he was in the architect's office, he sometimes would go out and inspect and look over some of these things and check this and that. And used to be my bugaboo, and I said, why don't they do something about that? They would leave the lights on in all the buildings, all during the day. At nighttime, I could see that, but I could never see why they'd leave them on. I thought, why don't you tell them to shut those lights off?
And did they?
I don't know. But that was one of my bugaboos that I used to.
I agree with you. I think that was a wonderful idea. I always ask this question to all of my guests. Looking back on your very long and full life, who or what had a major influence on you? Who really influenced you?
God.
God did.
Because I don't want to be known as a fanatic, you know, but my religion has always meant a lot to me. And of course I was in such close contact with, and all the priests, they were all such wonderful. Father Nugel was a priest I looked up to, Monsignor Madsen. He, by the way, is still alive, but he's way out of left field, if you know what I mean. He's not very well. And so I would say that, and
Your
of course,
church and your faith has
been my mainstay.
is your mainstay.
Yeah.
What is the best thing about being 99?
Oh, I don't want to say it, but I think it's the fact that people are so nice to me.
Oh, that's great.
Maybe they wouldn't be so nice if I, but well, that old lady, we have to be nice to
Oh.
her. No, you know, people have been. I like Doris. She is just such a dear. And so many, see, I've been a Catholic daughter for 75 years, and all those, and I'm going to their anniversary banquet tonight, and one of the girls will come and pick me up. And Carolyn Morley is another good friend that takes me every place. She just is so wonderful. And that's one of the nice things. People have been so good to me. And of course my daughter, who lives
Let's talk about you have a daughter, Kathleen, and a son, John. Tell me just a bit about what their careers were.
Kathleen,
You mentioned she worked for United.
yeah, she was working at the University Hospital right after graduation. And the United Airlines came and they were interviewing for jobs, you know. And unbeknown to us, Kay went and had an interview. They were holding it at the Jefferson Hotel. It was used as a hotel then. So we were away, and we came home, and we hardly got in the house. The phone rang, and Kay said, "As of now, your daughter's working for United Airlines."
That's great.
She had to go into Chicago for a 2-week what do they call it?
Training.
Yeah, and then she came back, and then she was assigned to California. And then, no, I take that back. She was in Chicago for a while, and then she went to California.
And what about John, your son?
John was a PE major, always was tied up with athletics, just loved everything. And I pitched for Iowa for a while.
Great.
And then, after he got his degree, went to Elmhurst, Illinois, as a teacher. Besides physical ed, I don't know what else. I think he had a couple other subjects that he taught beside that.
And you have 2 grandchildren
and
two great-grandchildren.
Great-grandchildren. Mark and Amy were the grandchildren. Mark is married, Amy is not married. And then Mark and Mila have Brian and Olivia.
Olivia, that's great. So I know you have a very busy life. You are, besides volunteering, you play bridge, and I know you are involved in the Catholic Church and have a lot of social things going. You've been blessed with very good health, haven't you, Edna? Was your mother too? Did you inherit that from your parents?
No, my father had very good health. My mother, no, she died of cancer. And my dad was just a weakened heart. I don't think he had a slight stroke, and then he was in the hospital before he died. But he had a real healthy, I would say, healthy life. Of course, he was outdoors. We had a big garden before we built the little house on the corner. When we lived in the big house, that whole lot was, he'd have potatoes and corn, and we had everything in there. And Mom did a lot of canning. I can remember one year she went away to visit a cousin, and it was during when the tomatoes came into being, And so while she was gone, my dad showed Mary and I how to can tomatoes, and we canned all the tomatoes. And of course, my mother came home, and I thought she had the idea they'd all spoil. There wasn't one spoiled.
Way to go.
Right.
My last question, because I'm sure people ask you, because I asked you before, just briefly tell, you have your kind of, you have your flower in your hair, and it's kind of a touch point for you. How did this begin?
Well, when my hearing became so bad I had to wear a hearing aid, it was on a bandeau that went across the top of my head. And being a very proud, silly girl, lady, I decided I didn't want people to know that. So it was back of my ear, and then it would come up like that. So then I decided to braid my hair. I had long hair then. I braided in 2 braids, and I crossed them over the top of my head, over the bandeau. And one day, a lady said to me, "Edna, you ought to wear a flower in your hair."
And there you are, ever since. It looks great, and it's been wonderful to have you sharing some of the stories. And I just look forward to seeing you again, and I'm sure some of our viewers will see you at the next iClub breakfast.
Oh, yeah.
So thank you, Edna, for being my guest.
You're very welcome. I've enjoyed it too.
My guest on One of a Kind has been Edna Englert. Next year, she will celebrate her 100th birthday, and thus she becomes the oldest guest that I've interviewed for the 2 shows, Tell Me Your Story and One of a Kind. She has many stories to share about the 1900s: schooling, recreation, Iowa City businesses, social events, the circus arriving, first airplane flight in Iowa, the history of the Englert Theater, Goosetown, Hawkeye sports, and much more. Edna is a community volunteer, a sports fan, a fine organist, a historical resource, a devout Catholic, mother, grandmother, and great-grandmother. Edna Englert is one of a kind.